And we are back on the Zero Hour. As our regular listeners know, we are very big on covering the digital bro complex that is today's Silicon Valley, and I've been really looking forward to speaking with our next guest, who's done terrific reporting on that. Mark Ames is a writer for Pando Daily. He is the founding editor of the satirical Moscow biweekly The Exile, which every good writer that I know knows about. That's Exile with a small e and a large X, as if E. Cummings and Malcolm X had gotten together. He's the author of Going Postal, Rage, Murder, and Rebellion, and the co-author of The Exile, again with that capitalization, Sex, Drugs, and Libel in the New Russia. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, listen, I wanted to talk to you about your great writing on what you call, and I might pronounce this wrong, the tectopus, the tectopus.
Yeah.
How am I doing?
Might be a slightly awkward. I mean, it's meant to be an obvious, reference to the Octopus, the book by the classic novel by Frank Norris about the octopus, the tentacles of power from the railroad companies and the bankers and so on, and how it controlled and affected everyone's lives, right down to small farmers in the San Joaquin Valley. Because as I'm getting more into the power of Silicon Valley and technology and their billions of dollars and their ability to reshape, industries and people's lives, I find myself going back to the last big technological explosion or revolution, whatever you call it, in the late 1800s with the railroads and communication lines and so on, and how that reshaped industries and lives, and how these guys were just they reshaped people's lives without people quite grasping it for a couple of decades. What forces were really hemming them in and controlling them, and also this is a period of a massive concentration of wealth and power and control over the democracy.
Well, I think this is such an important topic, and I'm so glad you're on it, because for a number of reasons, one of which is that our culture seems to exalt these guys who are enormously, in my experience, self-centered, self-driven, and, if anything, just foolishly naive about politics to the extent that they care at all. And now all over the world of meditation and Buddhism and mindfulness, and we had a Google executive telling a monk, if you were born too soon, if you'd been born in my era, you would work for Google. So we have this, we have this extraordinary stuff going on, and nobody's really talking about the fact that these guys are the kind of they're J. Pierpont Morgan and flip-flops, basically. And so I'm really glad you're on it, and glad especially that you've been writing about the I can't call it price fixing, but the illegal
wage fixing. It's really wage fixing, Cartel. What it is.
Well, tell us about it a little bit. Give us a minute on that.
Yeah, really quickly. So in the mid-2000s, 2005 or so, the big heavy part of this cartel was arranged between Steve Jobs of Apple and Eric Schmidt and Sergey Brin of Google, and then a few others, the head of Intuit, the head of Intel eventually, in which what was happening in 2005 is that the wages for tech engineers and programmers and so on were starting to soar through the roof, and cutting into revenues, into profits, which then hurts shareholders and hurts these guys, these billionaires. So they devised a secret and illegal series of agreements with each other not to recruit each other's employees, not to cold call recruit, which actually cold calling in Silicon Valley at least is considered by the companies and by recruiters the best way to get the best talent.
Because their argument is the best talent is not looking for work.
Exactly. And but by agreeing not to cold call or recruit each other's employees, what you start to do is you, and this is again classic sort of robber baron stuff. You you take out information, you take out competition from the labor market. I mean, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use their own terminology. So that means workers don't even know really what they're worth. They don't even know that they're not being recruited because their CEOs way above them made this secret agreement. They don't even know their worth because they're not being called. And
so wait a minute, hold on. So you're saying that these guys who preach the gospel of libertarianism, cybernetic libertarianism, are actually fixing markets? That's not a very libertarian thing to do, is it?
No, exactly. And these agreements, what I found in some of my updates by pouring through the court dockets, is that these agreements extended far beyond Silicon Valley. And this is kind of why I called it the Tectopus, because the tentacles of this thing, it began in Silicon Valley, these series of non-recruitment agreements, which violates the Sherman Antitrust Act, violates the Clayton Antitrust Act. These agreements spread across industries and across oceans. So you had Comcast, Clear Channel, Microsoft, Dell, the public relations giant in London, WPP, which has 122,000 employees. So you had, you're talking now potentially hundreds and hundreds of thousands of employees. And this is only what we know. And I'm finding more and more companies were involved in this.
And this is very important because this is basically anybody with a skill that's, as I understand it, anybody with a skill marketable to the Silicon Valley was subject to this sort of blackout. And, when I was working in the tech world many years ago, and Frank Norris was still alive, I think, I was recruited 3 times from one job to another. So you're basically saying the rigging the market, you're pointing the finger at Steve Jobs as being a key player in this and quite a brutal one. So in the minute that we have left, what are you working on next on this story? I just think it's incredibly important.
Well, I went to a hearing yesterday, and there's talk of, and from a citizen's point of view, I hope they don't settle. I mean, I'm for the workers getting what is just for them, what they believe is just for them in terms of compensation. But I would like to know more about this. So there was some talk of a potential settlement in the hearing yesterday. The trial starts in May. It may have just been talk, though. You don't know anything until it actually happens.
And you're going to stay on this until then.
Absolutely. So the trial starts in May, and I'm going to stay on it through then. Exactly.
Well, you're doing great work. I encourage everybody listening to listen to Mark Ames and read him at Pando Daily, writing about the tentacles of corporate power from the Silicon Valley, wage fixing, and their distortionary effect on the economy. Mark, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm RJ Eskow, and we will be right back after this. You are listening to The Zero Hour.